The Biosyn Corporation of Cupertino, California had never called an emergency meeting of its board directors before. The 10 directors now sitting in the conference room were irritable and impatient. It was 8:00 p.m. They had been talking amongst themselves for the last 10 minutes, but slowly had fallen silent, shuffling papers, looking pointedly at the watches. "What are we waiting for?" one asked. "One more," Louis Dogson said. "We need just one more." He glanced at his watch. Ron Mayer's office had said he was coming up on his 6:00 plane from San Diego. He should be here by now, even allowing for traffic from the airport. "You need a quorum?" another director asked. "Yes," Dogson said, "we do." That shut them up for a moment. A quorum meant that they were going to be asked to make an important decision. And God knew they were, although Dogson would have preferred not to call a meeting at all. But Steingarten, the head of Biosyn, was adamant. "You'll have to get their agreement for this one, Lou," he had said. Depending on who you talk to, Louis Dogson was famous as the most aggressive geneticist in his generation, or the most reckless. 34, balding, hawk-faced, and intense, he had been dismissed by Johns Hopkins as a graduate student for planning gene therapy on human patients without obtaining the proper FDA protocols. Hired by Biosyn, he had conducted the controversial rabies vaccine test in Chile. Now he was the head of the product development at Biosyn, which supposedly consisted of reverse engineering. Taking a competitor's product, tearing it apart, learning how it worked, and then making your own version. In practice, it involved industrial espionage, much of it directed towards InGen Corporation. The perceived demand for consumer biologicals in the 1990s was high. InGen and Biosyn were both at work in this field. The door opened and Ron Mayer entered the room, slipped into a seat. Dogson now had his quorum. He immediately stood. "Gentlemen, we are here tonight to consider a target of opportunity. InGen." Dogson quickly reviewed the background. InGen's startup in 1983 with the Japanese investors, the purchase of the 3 Cray XMP supercomputers, the purchase of Isla Nublar in Costa Rica, the stockpiling of amber, and the unusual donations to zoos around the world, from New York Zoological Society to the Ranthambore Wildlife Park in India. Despite all these clues, Dogson said, we still had no idea where InGen might be going. The company seemed obviously focused on animals, and they hired researchers with an interest in the past, paleobiologists, DNA phylogeneticists, and so on. Then, in 1987, InGen bought an obscure company called Millipore Plastic Products in Nashville, Tennessee. This was an agribusiness company that had recently patented a new plastic with the characteristics of an avian eggshell. This plastic could be shaped into an egg and used to grow chick embryos. Starting the following year, InGen took an entire output of this Millipore plastic for its own use. "Dr. Dogson, this is all very interesting, but at the same time," Dogson continued, "construction was begun on Isla Nublar. This involved massive earthworks, including a shallow lake 2 miles long in the center of the island, plans for a resort. Facilities were let out with high degree of confidentiality. But it appears that InGen has built a private zoo of large dimensions on this island." One of the directors looked forward and said, "Dr. Dogson, so what?" "It's not an ordinary zoo," Dogson said. "This zoo is unique in the world. It seems that InGen has done something quite extraordinary. They have managed to clone extinct animals from the past." "What animals?" "Animals that hatch from eggs, and that require a lot of room in a zoo." "What animals?" "Dinosaurs," Dogson said. "They are cloning dinosaurs." The consternation that followed was entirely misplaced in Dogson's view. The trouble with Moneymen was that they didn't keep up. They had invested in a field, but they didn't know what was possible. In fact, there had been discussion of cloning dinosaurs in technical literature as far back as 1982. With each passing year, the manipulation of DNA had grown easier. Genetic material had already been extracted from Egyptian mummies, and from the hide of the quagga, a zebra-like African animal that had become extinct in the 1880s. By 1985, it seemed entirely possible that quagga DNA might be reconstituted and a new animal grown. If so, it would be the first creature brought back from extinction solely by reconstruction of its DNA. If that was possible, what else was possible? The mastodon, the saber-toothed tiger, the dodo, or even a dinosaur? Of course, no dinosaur DNA was known to exist anywhere in the world. But by grinding up large quantities of dinosaur bones, it might be possible to extract fragments of DNA. Formerly, it was thought that fossilization eliminated all DNA. Now that was recognized as untrue. If enough DNA fragments were recovered, it might be possible to clone a living animal. Back in 1982, the technical problems had seemed daunting, but there was no theoretical barrier. It was merely difficult, expensive, and unlikely to work. Yet, it was certainly possible if anyone cared to try. InGen had apparently decided to try. What they have done, Dachshund said, is build the greatest single tourist attraction in the history of the world. As you know, zoos are extremely popular. Last year, more Americans visited more zoos than all professional baseball and football games combined. And the Japanese love zoos. There are 50 zoos in Japan, and more being built. And for this zoo, InGen can charge whatever they want. $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day, and then there's the merchandising. The picture books, the t-shirts, video games, caps, stuffed toys, comic books, even pets. Pets? Of course! If InGen can make full-size dinosaurs, they can also make pygmy dinosaurs as household pets. What child won't want a little dinosaur as a pet? A little patented animal for their very own. InGen will sell millions. And InGen will engineer them so that these pet dinosaurs can only eat InGen pet food. Jesus, somebody said. Exactly, Dachshund said. The zoo is the centerpiece of an enormous enterprise. You said these dinosaurs will be patented? Yes. Genetically engineered animals can now be patented. The Supreme Court ruled that in favor of Harvard in 1987. InGen will own its dinosaurs, and no one else can legally make them. Well, what's preventing us from creating our own dinosaurs? Someone said. Nothing, except that they have a 5-year head start. It'll be almost impossible to catch up before the end of the century. He paused. Of course, if we could obtain samples of their dinosaurs, we could reverse engineer them and make our own with enough modifications to the DNA to evade their patents. Can we obtain examples of their dinosaurs? Dachshund paused. I believe we can, yes. Somebody cleared his throat. There wouldn't be anything illegal about it. Oh no, Dachshund said quickly. Nothing illegal. I'm talking about a legitimate source of their DNA, a disgruntled employee or some trash improperly disposed of, something like that. Do you have a legitimate source, Dr. Dachshund? I do. But I'm afraid there's some urgency to the decision because InGen is experiencing a small crisis. And my source will have to act within the next 24 hours. A long silence descended over the room. The men looked at the secretary, taking notes and the tape recorder on the table in front of her. I don't see the need for a formal resolution on this, Dachshund said. Just a sense of the room as to whether you feel I should proceed. Slowly, the heads nodded. Nobody spoke. Nobody went on record. They just nodded silently. Thank you for coming, gentlemen, Dachshund said. I'll take it from here.